The twist tie, which is securing nothing to anything, is symbolism for life. We really need Cyberpower to stop screwing up its thermal configuration because this pre-built PC overall is excellent. They've done a lot of stuff really well with this pre-built. We were happy with it, except for the CPU thermals, where it's throttling and it's dropping 200 megahertz across all cores. This is a 9800X3D pre-built system. We bought it because we were specifically looking for two things. One was a configuration we thought we might actually recommend and like, and the other one was to see if Cyberpower could, for the first time in 10 years now of us reviewing their systems, not screw up the thermals. They failed on one of those. Now, AMD still gets shafted by big OEMs and by system integrators. They regularly are left out of the discussion, but lately that's been changing. And that's been particularly the case with Intel 13th and 14th gen degradation issues. So this having a 9800X3D, that was exciting. The Thermaltake 470M that we reviewed, that we actually liked, that had a 7800X3D and did pretty well. We liked that system overall. So we wanted to buy this to just see how a 9800X3D configuration would do for a pre-built system. And we bought this before the 50 series GPUs were announced. So I think we bought it first week of December or last couple days of November, something like that. And back then, this configuration was about a $200 markup on DIY cost, which is excellent. That's actually pretty damn good price positioning for a pre-built. Cyberpower has historically been one of the cheapest in terms of sort of the overhead from DIY versus their competition, and that's why we really want them to set it up properly. So let's get into it. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Antec Flux series of cases. We previously benchmarked and independently reviewed the Flux Pro case and found it to be one of the best cases we tested last year. The Flux Pro features the modern trend of wood accents while also focusing on a high airflow design. We found its performance to be among the best in our thermal testing. The case also has a number of ease of installation features to make assembly and cable management easier. Learn more at the link in the description below. So we bought this pre-built with our own money so that we could be the customer. We do this for pre-built reviews. Actually, most of the things we review these ways, we've been trying to buy them, including the 5090 partner models, all that stuff. Which can cause delays because since we're acting as a customer, that means there's not special access when we try to go that route. So it's a balance. Sometimes we take review samples, sometimes we buy it. But for pre-builds, we've been buying them all for a long time. And it's because so much of this comes down to the actual build assembly that if the company has a team of people looking at it before it goes to us as a known reviewer getting sampling, like free sampling, then we're not really getting the real experience. So anyway, this was another in the lineup. We've been trying to buy systems that we think are good. We're actively filtering for ones that we think will do well lately because there were so many bad ones. The 470M was a great look at that. And then the Asus G22CH-DH978, I think was the name. And if it's not, then it doesn't matter because you shouldn't buy it anyway. That was a terrible pre-built. Here's a reminder. And as for where the power supply is getting its air from, the answer is the answer appears to be another dimension. So that's good. So we jumped on this system from Cyberpower PC when it was a daily deal. They have these on their website where they have lower priced systems. It has a Ryzen 9800X3D with a good configuration on paper at what looked reasonable for the price at $1,865. And again, that's before the 50 series was announced. So it was also a rotating daily deal. It came in and out. The guy who manages our shipping for the GN store has a saying, which is getting cyber powered. Cyberpower's MO is a little less about cringe marketing and more about absolutely flooding you and overwhelming you with configuration options while shopping. Just look at this insanity. Not even counting the multiple base SKUs and rotating options like this daily deal, once you get into customization, it is utterly overwhelming. Everything is just $20 more, just another $10, just another $15. It takes the car model of adding every small piece of trim, and somehow at the end you end up paying 30% more. So look at this for an example. This is completely insane. We really hope the web developers at Cyberpower get paid per radio button because that's the only way this many radio buttons make sense. The page was so long with add-ons that Firefox literally refused to screenshot the whole thing. Some of this is good. We like options. But this is the Cyberpower way. And so we get back to we got cyber powered. Now, in this instance, We didn't add anything to the system. We wanted to buy it kind of as they present it because we think that's what most people who don't know what they're doing will do. And that's kind of our objective, is to test it from the perspective of someone who has as little knowledge about systems as possible, so we can help them make a purchasing decision. So we didn't change the add-ons, but in practice, it's not like it's a bad thing to do. It's their way of operating, and that's fine. It's just a lot of radio buttons. So as long as you don't hate radio buttons, probably it's fine. If you prefer checkboxes, you need to go somewhere else, I guess. There are a lot of good things about this PC on the surface. The on-paper part choice made sense. Scale management is excellent. General value is pretty damn good for a pre-built. But there's at least one massive negative, and it's the CPU thermals, and we'll come back to that. This table has the parts. Remember that we're looking at the data from back when we bought it, not today, because we want to judge it against the time of purchase. So that was in the very first week of December or last week of November. Pricing for the Cyberpower system is good to average, with a $200 premium over DIY for the exact parts at the time. The wildly popular 9800X3D is still going in and out of stock, making it frequently above MSRP due to third-party opportunism, but we're showing it as $480 for the sake of this chart because it restocks frequently, it can be bought for MSRP with patience, and we don't think you should pay a scalped price for it. The Bits Power 240mm liquid cooler and the white-labeled Cyberpower case can't be purchased retail from anywhere we saw, so we subbed those out with reasonable alternatives for DIY comparison. 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 is the right choice for this AM5 Ryzen gaming system, so that's good to see. RAM is a common area that pre-builts screw up since they underspec the speed, but this is good. The 2 terabyte capacity on the SSD is also good. The Asus Prime B650 motherboard actually is great to see here because it's an off-the-shelf model, which means it has public drivers, it has a public BIOS, and you can maintain it yourself. You don't need to wait for special SI versions of BIOS and drivers. So this is good to see. The 1000 watt power supply is overkill for this 9800X3D and 4070 Super configuration, but at the very least, it keeps the door wide open for future GPU upgrades for anything currently available, even to a used 4090 sometime in the future. The only place you might get limited is 5090 or something with the transients, depending on how well the power supply handles those. Overall, the paper listing of the specs is great. There's no proprietary bullshit. The parts list makes sense to us. And now we're gonna just move into the teardown and the testing. Okay, so now time to tear it down. I know the thermal results, they're bad, and we'd like to figure out why that is. Hopefully, I guess, it's just that the CPU cooler doesn't contact the CPU. I mean, look, that's a really bad thing, but at least it would mean the configuration might otherwise work. So let's do a quick walk around the system. First thing up, they've got a dust filter on top of the exhaust. So this is not necessary, and it's gonna impede it a little bit. I did notice that there's a little bit of a quality control issue here. We also noticed this damage. Jeremy saw this when he was doing the intake and the review. Not a big deal, but the screw is I don't know if it's actually cross-threaded, but it is definitely at an angle. So the case itself, there's things I like, there's things I don't like. One of the things I like is the door. So up here, you can see they've even got a marking for it. They've got this indentation, and then that obviously is just to pop the glass panel out. So that's kind of a nice, simple mechanical feature. They did perforate it. The porosity is low. There's a lot of metal here. The white painting they did on it is also eating some of that whole area. And so although it looks heavily ventilated, it's just kind of mediocre. It's definitely a lot better than what Cyberpower used to do, which was a glass wall. And then this is completely obstructing fans. So if you get a shot down here, you'll see that it's just an LED strip. So it's not like there's a hole back there for air. And so there's a fan behind this, which is doing very close to nothing, unfortunately. The bottom, so there's technically a hole in here, but I mean, between the filter and this foot, it's less than 1 millimeter of space to breathe. And so that power supply is getting choked for probably about 40% of its actual intake area on the bottom. Now on the positive side, this filter pulls out from the front. So that's nice. Rather than doing a small separate piece for the power supply in the back, you can pull it from the front, which means you don't have to pull it away from the wall just to clean the filter. So that is actually good. It's unfortunate that they've really choked the intake here at the bottom. For other intake stuff while we're on it, just really quickly, so the back fans are another area where there's room for improvement. You'll see this rail. So they have basically like 80 millimeter grill here, and then the hole spacing ends up like they didn't perforate any of this. And so they're covering like probably 20% of the fan between these two things and then just all the other normal grilling. So this should be perforated to let it breathe a little bit better as well. Normally, not a big deal. In this case, we're just gonna really inspect for thermal problems. Let's get the back off as well. Credit to them, the thumb screws are removable with hands, not tools. That's not always the case. Cable management first. This is always the easy part. Pretty good. Oh, so it's just a single 8-pin, I guess, on the other side. We'll see that in a second. So they tied the unnecessary one down. They went through and they zip tied everything. They trimmed the zip ties to be clean. I don't know what this twist tie is doing. I think it's an artistic expression. The twist tie, which is securing nothing to anything, is symbolism for life. We're all just floating kind of aimlessly in space, and that's what this twist tie represents. I think Banksy probably did it. Not sure what the twist tie is for. Not the biggest complaint. I'm not gonna take off points for that. The rest of this, they've got just a really cheap PCB for all the RGB cables. That's what these are. Looks like one might be bent. We'll look at that in a second. You can actually see in here, that one's labeled. So the reset switch is plugged into that PCB, and that's going to the front panel, and then this is presumably plugged in somewhere else. We'll find that in a minute. There might be a Molex centipede down here. Nope, just one pair of Molex. All right, well, cable management's not bad. There's really not a lot of places for them to pass through though. So they were definitely doing hard mode when they cable managed it. So internally, the RAM's in the right slots, that's good. These cables are fully seated. These are fully seated. That is a 12-volt 2x6 or 12-volt high power, can't tell yet. So that's seated properly, that's good as well. They've got a Bits Power 240 cooler that's been rebadged for Cyberpower here, so that's their logo and their mirrored finish. And that's what we really need to inspect. So let's get this flat and start looking at it. I'm gonna start with the cooler. Normally I'd do everything else first, but I have to know what's going on here. It's possible this cooler is just trash. We've never tested this one standalone. In the past, I don't know if it's Cyberpower or Highway Power, but someone had like a millimeter air gap between the CPU and the cooler. Let's just see if that's what it is. These were all fully seated, so no loose screws or anything. Okay. So they did have this cable. That's not great. That coil down there, they had that coiled around the screw. So that may have been causing it to be unlevel. I don't know if that's exactly what it was, but this absolutely, they should not be twisting this around the threads of a screw. That's literally insane. That's actually crazy. I don't know why you would do that. I'm hoping it was just a mistake, but that's not a good mistake. We're gonna have to disconnect this from the back. That was violent. We're gonna get 2 in 1 here, I guess, and inspect the RGB connections while we're at it. That was fine. That was fine. Hey, those were actually pretty damn secure. That was good. Cool. Well, maybe that's a positive here too. Those were they were super secure. I don't know if they did anything special, but all right. There's definitely a contacts problem. We spent some time inspecting this. The quick version is that the paste pattern showed us that there was not good contact, so the pressure application between the cooler and the CPU IHS was pretty bad. It was also uneven. That could have been caused in part by the cable that was coiled around the screw. We're not sure. But either way, contact was bad. The paste was not spread. So we think it was an issue where the cooler wasn't making good enough contact with the IHS and it wasn't able to keep the thermals under control. Now, another option is just that the cooler is really bad. We haven't tested it standalone because it doesn't matter. All that matters to us is does it pass in this configuration as they sell it as a pre-built. But ultimately, we had enough evidence to suggest that the assembly here was problematic, whether or not the cooler can handle the CPU. And 240 should be enough if the cooler is not trash, but very disappointing to see, and this is actually a problem we've seen from Cyberpower in the past. Time to get into testing. CPU cooling is the largest problem this system has, so we'll start with the charts for CPU thermals versus fan speeds over time during a full system torture workload. T-die jumps over 90 degrees Celsius as soon as the test starts, then dips as the CPU fans ramp to try to keep it under control and as the GPU load prepares to run. The fan ramp comes with an acoustic cost, we'll look at that later, and as for the rest, we can see that the AIO pump and the front panel fan speeds don't change at all, even as the CPU hits 95 degrees Celsius. This is terrible. The pump is fine because it's maxed out, but the relatively low 1200 RPM on CPU_optional isn't ideal, and maybe due to specific fan choice topping out. It could be due to some inherent behavior of the CPU optional header, which isn't directly controllable in BIOS. But either way, what's clear is that this temperature is totally unacceptable. It's unfortunate because a lot of other aspects of this machine have been good. This has been our historic experience with Cyberpower, though. They just really don't seem to understand thermal configuration. They screw it up all the time. And in the past, there was a computer we reviewed where we said it was a good deal as long as you pulled the cooler and put your own on it after you bought it, which does kind of kill the reason you buy a pre-built, unfortunately. So extremely disappointed to see this. As a reminder, the 9800X3D, it's not like the 7950X or the early AM5 silicon. The CPU doesn't boost to 95C. It just runs against its power limit. The chip is remarkably easy to cool when considering its performance, and yet somehow Cyberpower has failed to cool it. We'll talk more about what caused that failure in the conclusion. CPU frequency is next. This shows the performance impact of running against the 9800X3D's temperature limit like this. The Cyberpower system's CPU cores averaged out to 5023 MHz during the CPU-only portion of our test. That's 200 MHz lower than in our original review of the 9800X3D. This is a gigantic drop when considering it's applied across all cores. This indicates that the CPU is not able to consume enough power to keep clocks high because it's thermal throttling. So again, huge disappointment for an otherwise promising system. A drop of 200 megahertz is massive when looking at an all-core load, and this is just, it's just sad to see. We next manually set the fans to 100% in BIOS, but even this wasn't able to keep the CPU under 95C, partly because the fans were eventually ramping to 100% anyway. It may help boost slightly higher initially, but it doesn't resolve the throttling. The rest of the system's thermals also remained within variance between the two configurations. GPU, chipset, SPD hub, which is RAM, and drive temperatures were within the expected ranges. The 67-degree GPU temperature is good here, though. Get your shot glasses ready, because next up is testing in our hemi-anechoic chamber. Acoustic testing in our hemi-anechoic chamber underscores the immediate fan ramp, as it instantly jumped from the idle average of 31.6 dBA to 37.9 dBA average under load. That's louder than we'd like to hear at both ends of the spectrum, but it's also a huge and instantaneous change, and that's the part that really matters here. There's no gradual ramp. It just instantly dumps an extra 6 dBA of noise as soon as there's a load, and that's something that any end user would notice. Subjective analysis of the noise profile doesn't turn up any harsh tones, just the typical sound of loud fans. Here's a sample. Power testing's next, tested at the wall. This is mostly to determine if Cyberpower chose a large enough power supply. Logging power at the wall shows a very flat, steady state with an average of 500 watts during our torture workload of Blender on the CPU and 3D Mark Port Royal on the GPU. This level of load is uncommon in gaming scenarios where loading both components completely, and so it's generating as much heat as it can and pulling as much power as it can, basically. This puts the 1,000-watt power supply at 50% capacity, leaving a ton of headroom and keeping the power supply in a good spot on its efficiency curve. Time to get into BIOS, operating system, and software or bloatware presence. Booting into BIOS showed version 3042. This is from October 22nd of 2024. That's one version out of date from when we purchased it at the very end of November, first week of December. We look for the most up-to-date version at the time of purchase, but within a month is overall pretty good. The Expo memory profile was enabled, Asus's performance enhancement was disabled, and almost everything else was set to auto. Cyberpower has a clean BIOS setup that we agree with overall. The only change we'd like to see is disabling the Armory Crate bloatware installer and future day zero exploit, which is unfortunately a default setting. But Expo and disabling Asus's enhancements are both correct, so those were good. Windows setup itself was normal and not appended with any third-party software agreements. The desktop was clean, there wasn't bloatware. The only extra software at all was Asus's Aura RGB software, which technically adds functionality. The new NVIDIA app was pre-installed with driver version 566.36, which is actually from December 5th, and that was awesome to see because that's the latest version as of the purchase. It would have gotten installed basically right as the thing went out the door. They probably put this on there and then shipped it immediately. So this was awesome to see. There were no missing drivers in Device Manager either, which is also good. There also weren't any stray files left behind. Having a driver from right when we purchased, again, it's awesome to see, so good job to Cyberpower on that side. Overall, software setup is solid for the system. The entire aspect of pre-built has so many potential pitfalls that getting it right in BIOS and software deserves commendation. Packaging was fine. It wasn't that exciting. The box showed typical shipping wear we see when not double boxed. Double boxed is preferred. They didn't do that. The interior of the PC had a large pack of expanding foam protecting the GPU from impact. That is what we'd like to see, so that's another area where Cyberpower excelled. Accessories included with the Cyberpower PC system were better than average. The RGB keyboard featuring volume roller isn't particularly good, but easily clears most of the garbage tier peripherals we're used to seeing with pre-builts. The bag inside held a Game Pass promo card, a quick start guide, USB stick card, and invoice, as well as the usual motherboard pack-ins. The mouse, surprisingly, has thumb buttons. That alone gets it the It's Better Than Dell award. The Quick Start Guide is good. Step 1 guides the user to remove internal packing foam and to inspect for loose cables. Step 2 instructs the user to use the display connectors on the GPU instead of the motherboard, which is the most common mistake. And Step 4 takes care of the second most common by showing turning the power supply switch to on. The strangest thing included is the USB drive embedded into a fold-out card. At first, we thought this might be the usual thing and contain drivers and maybe a manual or something. Instead, it acted like malware. Plugging the USB drive into the system triggers a script that rapidly opens run, and then you can watch as it types in the URL for cyberpowerpc.com/share. This launches the default browser to that address and looks incredibly suspicious in the process. You can see from our capture footage that we incredulously did it again just to make sure of what we saw. The page it takes you to isn't even useful. It's just a landing page to push you to write a review of the system in exchange for 2 $10 gift cards 2 to 4 weeks after approval. So, great. Even worse, the USB device doesn't show up as an actual drive in Windows or Device Manager, rendering it an utter waste of resources. It wasn't malware, but it sure acted like it. We really would have liked to recommend this system outright. We just can't the way it's set up. It's close. It's real fucking close. But they just screwed up in one specific way, which is the thermals. And it reminds me of a pre-built review we did probably in 18 or 19 or something, maybe 2020, but several years ago, where it was a Cyberpower PC, and our conclusion was, it's good, but the first thing you need to do is replace the cooler. And that's kind of what this is. It's like, this is a system that you need to be like a really weird mix of savvy with computers and an enthusiast, but also wanting to buy a pre-built and also still okay with manually making changes to it. So if you're in that group where you're like, I know computers, but I don't have time to build one, but I do have time to change the CPU cooler, then this is the computer for you. So if you're one of those people, or you're making a recommendation for family or something, and you're okay with changing some of it, I don't know. Like, that's how we have to rationalize the purchasing for this. It's not as easy as just saying, yeah, it's good if you want to buy it. I'd love to be able to say that, but we can't. And so this system, it's one step short of greatness. It does a ton correctly. Their attention to detail on the GPU driver, that was awesome. It was like within probably hours or maybe a day or two of the system going out the door and shipping to us, and they had the latest driver on it. That was really cool to see. We would have been happy with like a month-old driver version, but something that close, that just shows a good policy in place where they've got some kind of good SOP for that system. The motherboard driver being only one version out of date, about a month out of date, that wasn't bad. We didn't really have a problem with that. The motherboard itself being a non-commercial model, meaning a normal end user model. That's also great to see. Cale management's good. Overall assembly, mostly good. The case is not particularly good and is part of the thermal problem, but this is just dropping the 200 megahertz below what it should be running at in all core when the system's fully loaded. That shouldn't be possible. They should be building this in a way where under a complete 100% load, the system does not thermal throttle, and it does. As for the rest, the part configuration is good on paper. There's an overspec on the PSU, but that doesn't hurt the system. And remember, this predates the 5070 announcement. The 9800X2D is obviously a phenomenal CPU for gaming. The 4070 Super is strong enough to play games at pretty good refresh rates at 1080p, 1440p, possibly needing to lower settings in graphics-heavy titles. The operating system, driver, software setup, all that's solid. The included keyboard and mouse are actually okay. It's not as e-waste as some of the other stuff. The quick start guide for novices was good. The automatically executing script on the USB drive was suspicious, but mostly just disappointing waste. Cyberpower did most of this well. It's just, again, we've been through this with them several times over the last decade now, and it's so disappointing to see because it just feels like every time one of their systems comes through and we buy it and we review it, the conclusion ends up being it's pretty damn good, but the thermals are a problem. And I don't know what it is that's so challenging for Cyberpower with the thermal configuration. Maybe whatever they're doing to test it is insufficient. Maybe it's outdated. I don't know. But Cyberpower, if you're watching this, I know a specific guy at Cyberpower who has control over this stuff. Maybe we'll talk later, but if you're watching this, please fix the thermal thing, because I would love for it if in 6 months, this is going to be my milestone for Cyberpower. In 6 months, we are going to look at the options again, and we're going to try again to find a good one, just like we did here, and I'm going to buy it. And it better have a good thermal solution, because they're just so damn close to being something we can recommend. And every time it's like one step short. So I really hope they can turn it around on the thermals, because it's just like a decade of it. You know, you look, it's like, is it even possible to fix this at this point? Or is this just somewhere in there? They have like a constitution that you agree to when you sign on as an employee, and it says, employee agrees to never allow a sufficiently cooled computer to ship out of this warehouse. That's what it seems like they're doing. So anyway, that's it. 90% of this we love, and the last 10% of it is just a huge problem and is totally unacceptable. And so we can't recommend it, unfortunately, unless you are okay with buying the pre-built because you don't want to build it, but you're okay with pulling the CPU cooler out and putting something better on it. So if that's you, great. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, if you want to support our effort to buy these things ourselves and review them as true end users and customers, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net, grab something like one of these t-shirts, our coaster packs, and we have dice kits too. So we have dice with inductors in them. They are e-waste inductors. They are embedded in sharp edge resin dice, and they come with a wooden box, and they come with a goblin token card. So check that out on store.gamersnexus.net for something unique. Or you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to throw a few bucks our way, and we put it towards this kind of stuff. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.